do you recognize this ribbon behind me on the wall? As a piece of background, I'm a Marine. Simon's a Marine. Chris, who we'll introduce in a moment, Army by deep background, national security professional separately. But Dave, you are still in uniform, sometimes as a guardsman, an officer, an Army officer, an infantry officer. Do you know what that ribbon is?
I don't know what most of the ribbons on my own rack are. I certainly don't know what that one is.
Oh, how many ribbons do you have on your rack, Dave?
Imagine.
It's underwhelming. It's underwhelming. I still don't know what most of them are or where to attribute them. I just go to rackbuilder.com or whatever, and they just mail you I have 100%. No idea what's behind you. I assume it's important to the United States Marine Corps.
Rackbuilder and easyrack.com, I think, have been my two go-tos.
I really missed out on the golden era of building your awards, because I schlepped myself to the French Creek PX and bought my little $1 at a time awards, put them together myself, and then got yelled at by a gunnery sergeant for how badly I did it. That was my experience with awards.
Well, I'm staying at the Marines Memorial Club and Hotel in San Francisco, and so that every room has a bunch of kind of like Department of Navy and Marine Corps stuff all over the walls. This is a combo set of, I'm going to angle the camera up. That's a Purple Heart on top.
Why with the NAM?
It's a NAM. Yeah.
This Simon, really makes me want that, but with the National Defense Ribbon.
Yeah, of course.
Which we've talked about before. The
Firewatch ribbon.
Most important ribbon. And then maybe OIF to go with it, so I could at least thematically.
There's an OIF on the wall right over there. So the Navy Achievement Medal, this green and orange one, it's a big deal if you're like
it's my highest award.
If you're like a lieutenant or a sergeant and below, it's like that's the grade appropriate. You did a great job at your job. You might have even like cleared the bar with a few inches to spare. Like you worked. So it's not like a giveaway freebie. It's like an important milestone event.
So hold on.
Because probably like an ARCOM in the Army then.
Yes.
Yeah, which is pretty funny because the ARCOM is like a whole structural level up, right? There's like a Navy Commendation Medal, which would technically be the equivalent of the ARCOM, but the culture of awards in the Army is very different.
Maybe
but what's funny
could be
the AAM is the actual like line to line equivalent, but it feels like those are more common in the Army. But let's be honest, all of these awards are more common the closer you are to the head shed. Full stop. That is the nature of awards, and it always has been. And I got a NAM right before I got out, and I had known the process fairly well, so I'd been put in for a NAM multiple times, and they'd all been kicked down as not appropriate for my rank. And I got it right after I picked up sergeant, and I took off when I was like finally living in the head shed. And I had a first sergeant at the time who was awesome. And he had done everything in the Marine Corps, infantryman, firefighter, recruiter. He was, first sergeant. So he was jumping into new places. He was in Motor T Company with me, and he got screwed a little bit. And he had to be first sergeant for the company on 2 deployments. Normally you would rotate out. And we came home from the second one, and he was complaining about one of my favorite topics, which is Bronze Stars.
Oh.
And how the Bronze Star has been completely destroyed in value because we hand them out like candy, yada, 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 yada. And then the next week,
like staff officers who did nothing but sit in the talk. Yeah.
And that is exactly what he got his Bronze Star for 3 weeks later. And it was a truly comical moment in the company office because he so badly did not want to put that Bronze Star on. Because he, out of all the combat and stuff that he saw, he got his Bronze Star for his second tour as a first sergeant in the company office. And it's we've done a funny thing to chest candy. We should abolish it. You can only wear your top 3. That's my hot take.
I actually kind of like that idea. You sometimes, Simon, wear the National Defense Service mini ribbon as a lapel pin. Is that true?
It's true. I've got National Defense lapel pins, and I've got some OIF lapel pins, depending on whether or not I want to take the piss out of whatever event I'm showing up to.
Well, I think I already said this, but this is a Marine-inflected company and podcast, given the co-host structure typically. But today we're joined by someone who's evening up the playing field, I suppose. So Chris Booth is joining us, national security professional, recently left the intelligence community. A deeper background is also an Army officer. Before we get into that, I'm Darren Smith, co-host of the Goat Rodeo podcast. Welcome this week, joined by regular co-hosts Simon and Dave. Chris, let's talk about you and maybe give you a sliver of airtime here. You left the IC a scant number of weeks ago after a long and healthy career. You've got a deeper background across a number of different domains, but some of the folks out in podcast land or the digital media space might know you best as the co-director for the maritime element within the Irregular Warfare Initiative, writing prolifically. And you recently did a piece with my guy Carl Marlantes, Matterhorn and Vietnam fame and Navy Cross fame. So tell us a bit about you, where you're coming from, and what gets you up in the morning.
Well, thanks for the intro, Garrett. I don't know. I guess I can't necessarily keep a job. I was an Army officer. I went to law school. I practiced law for 5 years as a litigator. As you mentioned, I just retired from the IC. I don't know if it adds value or not, but I can speak some Marine because as an interagency student, I got to go to Marine Corps University. And was a distinguished graduate of Command and Staff College, which as a interagency student and a civilian and an Army officer originally, I thought was kind of fun.
I kind of enjoyed Command and Staff. That was one of the professional military education modules that I thought was very worthwhile. Not everyone is, as we all know.
Yeah, no, I think they do a nice job too. And that's kind of what got me into writing because I was doing a fellows program there and I was also a Gray Scholar. And, so I had the requirement to write. And then I figured out that it was actually not that hard to get my stuff cleared. So that kind of started my process of writing, which led to I started writing some for IWI. And again, non-Marine, have never spent time in the Navy, just having gone to Quantico, focusing on the Indo-PACOM and everything, wound up writing a lot on maritime topics. And then after having been a non-resident fellow there, somebody said, oh, well, he's a known maritime expert, which is kind of a misnomer. Mm-hmm. But they asked if I would step up into that role, and it's been a lot of fun. It gives a chance to talk to some smart people and expand the network. And as you said, talking to people like Carl Marlantes, we have some other people teed up, can kind of solicit people to write for us. I can write when I want to as well. I want to spoil some of the people that have agreed to talk to us in the future, but some of the ones we talked in the past was like Dave Phillips, who's, a New York Times writer who wrote Alpha, which is a fascinating kind of study on the SEALs and culture, and had another guy who's an expert on the Norwegian insurgency in World War II. So talking to him about, how they countered the Nazis and some of the stuff that might still be relevant to today. I think that's one of the things is a lot of stuff is new again. A lot of the old ways of doing things with old technology is actually useful because so much of modern combat and conflict is sensing. And if you can be sensed, you can be struck, right? So some of the sticks and bricks, as they would say in the IC, has got relevance again. So as you mentioned, I'm new to the company, but I wanted to do something, that still is providing value. I had been looking for something in the defense tech ecosystem because I do think that there are a lot of adversaries out there. And hopefully my experience is relevant and helps us not only meet customers, but provide some kind of value. It's nice to have a product that is useful. I would generally advise most people not to commit espionage, unless, of course, you're in a position to help the United States or our allies. So, instead of selling that as a product, now I'm probably, helping with a value, which is good. And then, I talked to somebody who'd been a advisor for the FBI director a couple directors ago, and he asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, I think I want to go to a startup. He said, well, that's kind of unusual. He's used to FBI agents who want to go to Deloitte or something like that and have a senior VP title. And I said, yeah, I don't know. I understand the bureau culture. It's different. That's not really what I'm looking for. And he said, so you want to go to a startup. So you want to go to like a small, high performing team that's hyper focused on a mission. It kind of sounds like what you do now. And I thought, yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. I mean, typically we're resource constrained. It's very MacGyver-esque, sort of like you've got a flashlight and a Band-Aid and, a stick of gum and 3 people. Like, how do we make this into something that works? So I think, Garrett, your team
or
is
MacGruber,
yeah, or MacGruber, right? Like, I think you've advanced a little bit past that point, so maybe you have a little bit, greater resources and money than just 1 stick of gum. But it is fun to kind of come into a team that is still figuring out where things go. And so I think my role is going to be working with the IC, but also trying to seek some opportunities with foreign partners. I think it's important. We still do have allies out there, and a lot of countries are dealing with some of the same problem sets and adversaries that we have. And I think it's best for America when not only are we successful in our economy, but when we're helping other countries that have similar and aligned interests. So looking forward to that.
Well, this week I'm to riff on a couple of those themes. This week I'm at the Military Veteran Startup Symposium, MilVet. MVS, founded and run by my friend Tim Shaw, who's also a Reveal investor. And that's all about supporting the military veteran and national security veteran persona as they transition into the tech ecosystem and do hard things and build companies and all that stuff. And I think there's going to be quite a lot of the kind of group that you're talking about, folks who were on mission, love the mission, kind of burned out in government service, maybe a little bit, or they've hit retirement, or it's just time to transition or whatever. And many of them are afraid that they won't be able to find that kind of high performing, small team, high trust, on mission opportunity once they leave. Sure, the Deloittes and the Accentures and the whatevers of the world, or the big legacy prime contractors who will shuffle you into a 0930 to 1430 on-site consulting gig where you don't do much. You just kind of like mark time in an office and EM your way into a second retirement. That isn't for everybody. And I think what you've done by joining Reveal is showing your true colors. You're a hustler and a risk taker. That being said, I don't think it's terribly risky nowadays. We're on the trajectory. And we're moving along. Before we got going, Chris, we were talking about this. I heard Bill Maher last week. I watched Bill Maher's show. I heard him call what we're about to do here. I heard him call his show ratings whore because he doesn't want to talk about Epstein, but HBO basically said, you want ratings? Here's the way to get ratings. So anyway, we're not bringing up anything Epstein related out of pure salacious energy or hunger. We're bringing it up for real national security and geopolitics reasons. But you brought up this recent scandal that looks like it might be poised to potentially bring down the UK government under Keir Starmer. So quick summary: Peter Mendelsohn, longtime UK Labour Party architect and worker bee, has been on the scene at kind of national level, even international level, for decades. The recent dump of 3.5 million Epstein-related documents from the U.S. Justice Department indicated that Peter Mendelsohn had a series of inappropriate interactions with Jeffrey Epstein that have led to his resignation. He was serving as the UK ambassador to the United States, led to his resignation, and there is now an open criminal investigation. That's not the only item, though. So that was kind of tip of iceberg. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Labour Party leader, and currently the Prime Minister of the UK, has been taking all kinds of heat. He was already in a weakened state due to, inability to lead. I don't know. I won't comment too much on that one. But his chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney, has now resigned to take some of the heat for appointing somebody like Peter Mendelsohn. And then this is also bleeding out, obviously, into the royal family with Andrew Windsor, stripped of titles, former Prince Andrew, who has a sordid and very thorough history in the Epstein files. So anyway, all of this being said, what does it say to you, Chris? Why was this interesting on the global stage?
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of the waterfront there, Garrett. But it seems like, Keir Starmer is somebody that picked Mendelsohn to go to the U.S. to begin with as an ambassador. And I imagine that's like pretty much the most important relationship that the UK has. I mean, there's always still that close cooperation we have with them, really, in foreign policy and intel sharing, et cetera, right? So it's a sensitive position, and it's embarrassing that he picked this guy who apparently has had past ethical scandals. So this isn't like, he's got a bit of a checkered past. To put him in that sensitive role reflects poorly on the prime minister. I think that's what he's getting criticism for, is like, why did you pick this guy to begin with? And now they're talking about that they're going to release all the correspondence between Mendelsohn and Whitehall. And, the concern they have there too is there's probably stuff that is less than flattering in terms of their discussions about the Trump administration, which could only make things probably worse for the relationship, which is not always great between the UK and Washington right now. Additionally, I'll bring it into defense tech of Mendelsohn had this consulting company, and apparently Palantir is one of his clients, and he was able to direct a non-competitive bid to them for 240 million pounds to the MOD. So that's being reviewed. So, it's quite the scandal. And I think one of the things that has come out of the investigation on Epstein is that he was giving him, at least in 2008 during the financial crisis, a lot of insight and insider information on how the UK was dealing with that, right? That's the sort of thing that would be valuable. I imagine a lot of what's going on is trying to curry favor, but, Epstein potentially could have made a lot of money off of that. He probably could have, used that information for other people in his network. There seemed to be a lot of influence peddling. But if he was connected to any foreign governments, I mean, there's some suggestion right now that he is at least trying to get close to Putin if he wasn't, directly working for the Russians. Information coming directly from a high-level labor minister, that is being shared with Epstein that wound up in Moscow. While maybe not directly treason, if he had handed it directly to the Russians, I think that would certainly look like espionage, right? So that's a concern there too, as they get to the bottom of just what exactly this guy was sharing with Epstein and what he was getting out of it. So I think in some ways they're saying it's, one of the most troubling episodes in decades for the UK. And as you mentioned, I mean, Starmer is already politically unpopular. So were he to be forced out or fall on his sword, right? I mean, the party may decide that he needs to take the fall. I think there can be, second and third order effects too, right? I mean, what does it do for UK support for Ukraine? They're dealing with reform and Neil Farage, who's definitely, sort of isolationist. How does that impact stuff in Europe? And the UK had been taking a larger role in defense, and it's kind of funny, the Germans want the British to take a larger role in NATO, even though they've left the EU, and the French maybe are saying like, hey, not so fast, we can handle some of this themselves. But I think everybody is going to be disadvantaged for European defense if the British become more isolationist as well. So yeah, this could have larger ramifications for people other than just Starmer himself.
Well, let's pull on maybe a couple of those threads. First off, Palantir stock, right at the end of the year, this would have been following the announcement of that large contract. Palantir stock was just under $180 per share. And then post the announcement that this contract was under scrutiny, or there was pressure to freeze it or rescind it, or whatever the terminology would be, I think it took an immediate 10% hit in public markets, but it's down 36% just over the past month, which is not good for them or for their shareholders. It's interesting to see that a scandal like this Epstein thing could have tentacles that spread all the way out into the upper echelons or the clouds around our industry. It doesn't surprise me. You don't think about some of this stuff. European defense, European society has been under massive pressure for really decades, right? I think there's immigration crises much more significant than what we experience here in the United States. Labor government in the UK is affiliated with a lot of that kind of continental, the anti-Brexit stuff, right? This is fraught times for Europe generally, but the UK in particular. Yeah, really, really interesting. Dave, are we exposed at all to not any of the scandal, of course, but are we exposed at all to some of these like up and down swings.
I don't know that we need to use the word
UK
exposed.
Sorry,
anywhere
wrong word.
near the Epstein.
We'll edit all that,
stuff.
right?
Yeah,
That'll
this will come out in post.
Edit that in post. Choose a different word.
Yeah, please replace all of Garrett's words with my words, but otherwise leave it as is.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
You have five people that work for you that are in Great Britain right now,
Oh, okay.
partnered with the UK MOD and to some extent some of the vendors that we've talked about. I'll probably leave it.
Yeah,
there.
I mean, like the stock's an interesting piece of that, right? Because there's such a retail heavy stock. Like, I mean, I don't think this is the thing that really harms Palantir long term. That's going to bounce back, and it's going to continue to be, I think, a fruitful 3 years because they're going to catch all the same headwinds that folks like us want to catch, right? We're selling to these same folks, and even with the potential for isolationist sentiments, I think everyone agrees that there's a real strong desire to spend more on your own national defense in order to protect yourself.
Yeah. We have not only do we have employees in the UK and personnel over there, I think we have maybe multiple people on the continent right now too, because of this upswing in spending and buying domestic in the European defense markets often means buying international stuff, American stuff through a prime contractor within, your political boundaries. I don't know if that's true across the board, but that's what we've seen.
That was my only point there is, increased defense spending of these nations means that we've taken it very seriously, especially recently.
It's fascinating though. I mean, I'm going to be honest, fellas. I was not tracking almost any of the British implications of the Epstein files. And before this, Chris sent some articles to me, and they're all paywalled, which is probably why I haven't seen any of this. So all of the publications that would talk about this with the appropriate rigor are not accessible. So it's fascinating to me how much of the popular conversation around Epstein and that set of files has none of the stuff that's probably going to have the most dramatic global and like government level impact. We really love to focus on like the bread and circuses aspect of it. Meanwhile, one of the largest economies in the free world is about to have to turn over its government. And the popular sentiment I've seen is there's no accountability for anybody involved anywhere in the Epstein files. And here we are with like
Isn't it all? It's also interesting that I think there are still millions of documents that are as yet unreleased.
Yeah, the data challenge
redacted,
of that millions of documents is crazy.
You just think about like what are the ethical responsibilities for those in control of releasing them? Deciding when or whether to release them. You're seeing what's playing out in geopolitics as some of it is released, right? The UK government could fall. And what does that do to the markets? And what are the downstream effects for just average citizens when you create that kind of turmoil by opening Pandora's box or however we want to
also drip feeding Pandora's box, right? Like, I mean, you could substantially destabilize markets just by like holding things in reserve.
Oh yeah.
In order to appropriately time the release.
Yeah. Information is power.
Yeah, it's not a misinformation campaign necessarily, but you're right. I mean, it definitely can have that similar effect. I don't know if it's a black swan at this point or more of a white rhino, which is one of my favorite descriptions, right? Which is the problem everyone sees coming, but nobody actually addresses, and then they get run over and go, "Oh, how did that happen?" Right? I think Simon, you may need to use some of your office stipend to subscribe, perhaps, to more varied news sites.
Oh, can we do that? That's amazing.
I was previously subscribed. I'm going to be honest. I'm generally disappointed in the quality of those publications. Like I had a Wall Street Journal, a New York Times, a Washington Post, and the frequency with which I use it was so low.
So you more into TikTok or like where are you getting your news sources?
Fantasy novels.
Ideally nowhere. Most of my news I get from Politico. Okay. The stuff that I'm focused on and interested in is in a fairly narrow band, and as fascinating as the Mendelsohn stuff is, right? Like it's not going to touch my day to day, so it's hard to prioritize.
Here's like where it might even make sense or matter for the U.S., right? I mean, if the U.K. becomes more isolationist, we're leaning on them. I mean, not only to uphold stuff in Europe, but Like there's this dogs decided to wake up. There was this transit of the South China Sea in September called Operation High Mast, right? And so the British had taken their new carrier, the Prince of Wales, and they led a task force. It was UK, Canada, Spain, Netherlands, and Norway. And they brought them all the way from Europe to transit the SCS. And they did joint exercises with Japan, US, Australia, India, South Korea. So if our claim is we're really interested in refocusing on Indo-PACOM, if one of our leading partners decides like, hey, we're not going to do any of that kind of stuff anymore and takes a back seat, I mean that can impact our defense as well.
So I mean the irony, right, is that hot on the heels of the NDS, where we have massively downgraded the Indo-PACOM priority. So maybe it's the reverse scenario where the Brits need to be paying attention to us, taking our eye off Indo-PACOM, and they're going to have to step it up.
Fair. That's a good point.
Well, Dave, I think you're going where I'm going to take it. So let me tee it up. And if it goes the direction you want, great. If not,
sure,
redirect us. But maybe segueing from the lofty heights of Mount Olympus of the defense tech giants like Palantir, going slightly down slope, but still high above where the peons live. Saronic, which has raised just under $1 billion of venture capital in the last 6 or so years, maybe less, 4 or 5 years, which promises to revitalize or rebuild American shipbuilding capacity, is kind of on a tear, right? I think they've announced a couple of very large projects to include a shipyard takeover in Louisiana that's something like $300 million worth of project scope, aimed at building big capacity here domestically, which is obviously a challenge. We referenced Secretary Phelan, Secretary of the Navy Phelan last week, and some of his shipbuilding aspirations, and then a large Navy contract, just under $400 million for autonomous surface vessel, a vessel called the Corsair. So anyway, Dave, I think this is where you were going. Let's talk Saronic.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because, in a bunch of episodes, Simon has said something like, okay, this tactical thing that we're talking about in VC startup land, nobody cares. They care about shipbuilding. The crowd of folks that I interact with cares about shipbuilding. And that $400 million award from the United States Navy to build ships is, $200 million of that is up front. And that is a VC-backed startup. Saronic is, or that's its DNA. That's VC-backed software autonomy, breaking the monopoly on naval power. That's not General Dynamics. That's not Huntington Ingalls, who I'm sure both are paying attention. But we're designing a ship around autonomy and spending money that we would otherwise spend on a destroyer on a bunch of very small autonomous surface vessels, which I think that's a big step. I mean, if big blue water steel bending Navy is cutting $400 million production contracts to essentially an AI startup, that's huge. And I think it's a really positive indicator. And I already know what Simon's going to say, which is, Dave, that you're talking about $30 billion annually of
I mean, you're talking about a destroyer,
and
which is $4.5 billion by itself. Yeah, one single destroyer.
Dave, we spend $30 billion or something a year on shipbuilding. That's a 1% or somewhere around there.
Bump it way up.
It's not relevant. I promise you, Huntington Ingalls and General Dynamics would disagree.
Oh, I don't think it's not relevant, but I do think the talk track is the same, right? If defense tactical software is 1% of the tactical equipping budget, for sure, $400 million is 1% of the if we're lucky, not even 1% of the shipbuilding budget, right? It's the levels stay the same. It's just a different.
Well,
but it's doing business differently, though, right? Because
that's what I'm more interested in is what are their unit economics and can they survive with the shipyard that they just bought in Louisiana? That is the real question.
General Dynamics or Huntington.
Dave, before we get into it, let's set the table just a little bit. So this will tickle Simon's fancy, which is a gross way to say anything. But the SHIPS Act, which was the Ships for America Act, Shipbuilding and Harbor Infrastructure for Prosperity and Security, bipartisan in origins. Senators Mark Kelly and Todd Young, Democrat and Republican respectively, introduced the bill in 2024, and then it went all the way through. It was addressing this problem. This was part of the kind of narrative wrapper on this effort, but It's a thing called, or a dynamic called, the 200-to-1 gap. So China currently produces 50% of the world's commercial shipping by gross tonnage. I think that's how they're measuring it. The U.S. produces fewer than 1%, less than 1% of global commercial ships, and has fewer than 80 internationally flagged vessels, which is insanity. There's some Jones Act stuff here, but Simon, so don't get me started. My libertarian roots, don't get me started on the Jones Act. The Ships Act claims to add 250 ships to the U.S. international fleet within 10 years. Some of that, I think, coming from domestic production capacity. I don't know if you were tracking that piece of legislation or how it's
very
playing out,
easy to track, but nothing has happened.
Sure. So there's a direct connection, though, back to Saronic, because Saronic will be the downstream beneficiary if the plumbing ever gets unclogged and resourcing and authorities flow to domestic shipbuilders.
Well, and also if they even get like some new capacity, right? I mean, if they buy up this port and, refurbish it, I think we really have like 4 or 5 active shipyards total, which is insanity. I mean, there's backlog for even refurbishment of existing ships. There's a submarine that's been waiting 7 years to have maintenance since it pulled in. So if we were to get into any kind of conflict and not have everything sunk, even the ability to sit there and maintain or repair is just, we don't have it. So hopefully it's additive to have Saronic building new capacity or bringing, even more people into the industry, because that's another shortfall that we have, is that we don't necessarily have trained and skilled labor that can do some of the stuff that we need for the ship industry.
Yeah, merchant marine incentive programs for student loan forgiveness, a whole range of other stuff for workforce development. There's a Restoring America's Maritime Dominance executive order, which is intended to reinforce this, alongside all the other stuff that we've talked about on the podcast, like the software centric acquisitions mandate, and using flexible contracting mechanisms, all of the above. So Simon, sounds like you are doubting whether the Ships Act plays all the way through, but
has not even had a hearing in either chamber.
Yeah.
And it's been, the House version has 130 co-sponsors. Movement whatsoever. It's an interesting bill. It's heavily backed by a nonprofit group called With Honor, who talks about it a lot. Obviously, it's covered in veterans. I think there's an interesting, who can and will solve this first sort of question. Does this market need to be heavily deregulated in order for anyone to do it? Or can Saronic and similar ilk just start buying shipyards and change the way they do business? And to the point of Dave, like, $400 million, I'm not sneezing at it. However, how much does it cost to run a shipyard? Does it make good financial sense? Or are they, running on runway, hoping to deregulate in time to save their business model, which is very possible. I don't know the inner workings. And I mean, Garrett, you've heard me say this a million times. Who's the SpaceX of shipbuilding? And I do think it's interesting that Anduril has not bought a shipyard.
They partnered with Mitsubishi, or
they have partnered
Hyundai
exclusively internationally. They bought an Australian submarine company. They partnered with Hyundai. Like, they basically placed their bet on, we're not going to be able to do this better than it's happening in the Pacific, so let's go partner and purchase in the Pacific rather than try to rebuild or facilitate a shipyard here in America. And it's not because they lack ambition or creativity, right? Arsenal One is a massive bet in Ohio. But it's fascinating. I would have thought it would have come out of that camp. So I'm not sure what the answer is here. But while $400 million is not nothing dollars wise, it's not even a fifth of a single ship.
It's not the 400 million that's important here. It's the indicator of a different way of doing business, like doing business differently than we've done for the last 200 years. This is the most entrenched process. General Dynamics and Huntington Ingalls do not design or build prototype ships until the United States government writes down the requirements and puts them out there and says, go build a prototype ship and invest a bunch of money. So this is interesting because Saronic spent VC money, built real working vessels before a production program ever existed. No guaranteed buyer. And they designed the entire thing around, what's the famous Henry Ford? If you'd asked them what they wanted, they would have said a faster ship. There were no requirements for build a ton of autonomous surface vessels and have that be the Navy's new strategy. They designed it, came up with it, and then sold it to the United States Navy. That's what's different here.
So, I mean, you're comparing apples and oranges, man. The Saronic ship is 24 feet long. It is. It's a whole. You're correct in that it is a different way of doing business, but it is not supplanting the previous way of doing business. It is the Navy recognizing, oh no, we no longer get to build big ships. We're going to go build little things now instead. It's not like they said, hey, I'm going to build a prototype frigate.
Same with tanks and one-way attack. You could make that argument everywhere.
Yeah.
Like you could make that argument across the board with all
And
of
I
our
would.
U.S. military modernization.
And I'm happy to make it.
It may be the future too. I mean, right? I mean, yeah, there'll always be some exquisite, expensive platforms, but you're going to want more ubiquitous, cheap, easily replaceable. I mean, the Ukrainians are having tremendous effect right now with some of the stuff that they're using. And if you want to get back kind of old school, right? Like Admiral Zumwalt in the 70s wanted the high-low model, right? So you need to have a mix of cheap stuff that doesn't cost a lot that you can afford to lose, and then your big stuff that's probably going to be sunk by a wave of Chinese hypersonics can still feed the acquisition beast and bring home bacon to various congressional districts.
In the meantime, partnering has to be part of it. It has to be part of the solution to plug actual gaps, right? So like Dave, you're talking about doing a business differently in future to go after the high-low, attritable kind of like option that Chris is talking about. But you still need some traditional capabilities. Example, in December, and then I think just finalized maybe in the last couple of days, there's this Arctic icebreaker kind of grouping. So the Finns are famous for having incredible icebreaking ship capacity capability. They sold a certain number to the United States, and there's this grouping of counter Russia, Northern European and American, Canadian Arctic attention, right? We've talked about this a few times with respect to Greenland. Don't worry, I'm not going to bring up Greenland. But this is an interesting one, right? So icebreakers are critical for mobility and navigation in the Arctic. The United States simply has zero of these things. Cannot build them domestically. There's also a major Russian threat in the Arctic. So this is yet another example of like going overseas to like figure things out in the multilateral space.
Well, the Coast Guard has two icebreakers. Icebreakers are very much a long debated hot topic thing, and icebreakers are huge. They're like, especially compared to these like small autonomous ones. I do wonder if there's small autonomous icebreakers out there. That's a fascinating question. But simultaneously, Trump has announced a new Trump-class frigate. It's going to cost billions of dollars. And interestingly, will be built by...
They're going to be gold, interestingly.
Do you know where they're going to be built? Philadelphia by Hanwha. Hanwha owns a shipyard in Philadelphia. So that's an interesting, I think, like, where is this thing going? Because it's the same conversation from the other end. You want to talk about a new way of doing business? It's probably the very successful shipbuilders in Asia just coming in and taking over in a similar way we saw with the auto industry, right? Like if the protectionism that surrounds American shipyards goes away, the first people to benefit are going to be the very successful Asian shipbuilders that can come in finally and go, okay, cool. I can do this overnight. I've been doing it nonstop the entire time.
Part of the question is like, do we need to solve some of this onshore, some of this capability? This is the question around Taiwanese semiconductor fabrication, right? I mean, it has worked fine, provided that China doesn't try to, take and dominate Taiwan. But because of that geopolitical risk, we need to, at some level, onshore some of that capability. Is that also true in shipbuilding? Probably. To what extent? I don't know. But it seems like there's a heck of a lot of energy, not least in the Trump class frigate, but also, this Arctic icebreaking move. And Dave, back on topic for you here, I'll hand the baton back to you. Back on the new way of doing business for risk-taking, Serrano and the venture investors who back them.
That's exactly. Like I wasn't intending to comment on like how the U.S. should position to dominate the Arctic, right? Like I understand that we can go in all these different directions, but what we are talking about here is, do VC-backed startups belong in defense, and if so, how? And how does that work? And what I'm saying is, like, this is an indicator that it can work. That there are human beings inside the United States military where this works. Build it and they will come. Know what's needed, know what's possible from a technical perspective, partner with and educate the customer set, build a thing with your own dollars and your own investment, deliver that thing in an OV1 of how it should work, and can have a VC-backed startup with a $400 million shipbuilding contract. That's my point.
A point well made, Dave. A point well made.
24
Simon,
foot's not a
there's no
ship.
way you can refute it.
Yeah, 24 feet's not a ship. First of all, I will start there.
It's the one we're going to be relying on when the area denial weapon strikes all the destroyers. I mean, to Chris's point, if you have $40,000 area denial weapons all along the coast of wherever we're engaged with, that the destroyers are getting wiped off the board really quickly.
Yeah. And also, I mean, 90% of U.S. industry relies on shipping to get here, right? So if we don't have some kind of solution, at least as a stopgap, and if we're not going to develop an industrial policy that says like, hey, let's go back to actual shipbuilding, if you want to have any kind of products in any kind of like long-running conflict, say with a China or something like that, you need to, that's my boss. So Garrett, Kale is like, what are you doing right now? You need to have some kind of solution to it. And if nothing else, like I think the tech solution, again, is being demonstrated as extremely effective. I mean, the Ukrainians have chased the Russian Black Sea fleet out of most of the Black Fleet using nothing but like cheap UUVs that they're building themselves. I mean, it's phenomenal. And I mean, hell, they just took out a Kilo class submarine the other day that they were able to sneak in there. So it doesn't have to just be 24-foot prototypes, but there may be other models that can also be built. I think that makes sense.
Have faith, Simon. Have faith.
So, Chris,
I think you're trying to shoehorn a technological solution to a problem set that requires a much more holistic strategy. We're not sitting in a static port trying to batter the Ukrainians. We are trying to guarantee freedom of navigation for the entire ocean, as we have traditionally done since post-World War II. What we really need is an incredibly large number of exquisite platforms just to maintain presence. If we really want to control choke points, we'll do what the Houthis did, and we'll go put troops at the Straits of Malacca and Hormuz and the Panama Canal, because it's much easier to sit on the land and fire rockets and missiles than it is to have a huge fleet of boats.
Right. We have a whole service department that's responsible for doing that, I think.
Who's responsible for that?
I'm pretty sure, isn't it the word that Garrett's got behind his head? Isn't that a function of the United States Marine Corps?
The Nemesis missiles don't exist yet. But aside from that, what the real problem there is deciding what we want to be when we grow up. Just building a shit ton of 24-foot boats that I don't even know what the Saronics Corsair does. Does it have weapons on it? Is it logistics? Couldn't tell you. Probably has user-defined payloads, right? Like they just pick and stick different things on there. But to what end? Is the goal to go hold ports at risk? The way the Ukrainians are doing against the Russians?
I'm gonna find somebody on this podcast that wants to talk to me about doing business with defense. Chris.
Yeah, I mean, Simon sounds like he's not an investor. So if this is Shark Tank, he is not buying what Saronic is pitching. I get that. But
someone is going to become fabulously wealthy making a bet on a shipbuilding company. I'm just not sure which one it's going to be yet.
They're already, those selling this, some of these is just even like a naval drone. Like the Persian Gulf has a lot of these right now as a sensor. So you have the 24/7 view of like, every IRGC ship that's pulling out a Bond or a Boss or whatever could be monitored by something cheap. But I mean, I think were we to get into a long-running conflict, which is how everybody predicts it, after we beat the crap out of each other, and then it's like a bar fight where somebody is sitting there and like grabbing whatever tools available, what might happen is you're going to get into like a maritime commerce conflict where we starve the Chinese out because they rely on a lot of their natural resources that they don't have coming from Latin America, from Africa, what have you. And these Saronic ships that Dave's a fan of might be perfect at putting a bunch of holes in, some, Chinese merchant vessels. And then you don't need to have anything more complicated than that. I think that's a great, method, particularly if all of our stuff is at the bottom of the sea or waiting 7 years to get repaired.
Dave, can I chime in your defense? I'm gonna do my best here. So new venture-backed projects, they need to start somewhere, right? Yes, Saronic is going to build 24-foot things that can't maintain freedom of navigation in all waterways in the whole world. Yes. But you got to start somewhere. So inevitably, when you prove out a more limited model, but you thereby like prove the the scalability of a new way of shipbuilding, which is Dave's point, you could scale to essentially any size, right? You could scale to any size vessel, any capability set, whatever. And there are plenty of companies, not just Saronic, right? Our friend of the pod, which is not actually a thing that he is, but Austin Gray, one of the co-founders of Blue Water Autonomy, is another one of these companies that's promising to do at some level like autonomous ship building. And they're not alone, right? There are plenty of these things. So I think that it would scale up. Like you don't start, or I guess you could, but in this case, in the Saronic case, they didn't choose to start by like building the autonomous shipyard to build aircraft carriers. They chose to build an autonomous shipyard to produce a relatively high volume of relatively small vessels. And I think once you prove that, you scale it, then you end up being able to build much larger, more exquisite capability over time. Dave, is that your point? Am I making your point?
100%. I don't care about the ship. I care about the process.
That's right.
The buying process that our customer goes through.
Yeah. I think the buying process should not be first. I think that the strategy and the intent should be the first thing.
Unfortunately, the buying process of the entity that you used to work for, which is the U.S. government, is so jacked up that if you don't solve the buying process for the customer, you might as well not even try to build the best mousetrap, right? Like you might as well not even try.
So, Chris, stay with me here. Don't let these guys drift back off into Arctic dominance land for a second. Dollars, rupees, pounds, sterling, and the realities of doing business with this very challenging customer. I want to take advantage of your being a guest on the show and your background and experience. So, I have always seen the IC as a whole as a very challenging customer.
Yeah,
to work with, because the DoD is a challenging customer. They have all these barriers to entry, but I've always seen the trust and security barriers of the IC being even more extreme in, again, the VC-backed startup sort of community.
Yep.
Can you comment at all on how you think about like go to market or what your best bets are or your front doors for companies that are in positions like ours?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I would challenge people to name the 18 agencies that are in the IC right now, right? So, and all of them are probably doing their own acquisition. And then even in the various agencies, there are different inputs and there are different customers. So it's very siloed. They don't all talk to each other. I think the other problem that we face is that it's not like DoD, so their needs may be more unique or boutique, and they might not need as many, right? So the question is, do you want to sit there and build something that is for a limited customer base that may not really talk to others, that may have specific limitations on your ability to shop it anywhere else? Because they often will say like, hey, we want this just for us. And so then you get into NDAs or whatever, right? So I think there is a challenge. I do think if you have a product that is, already adopted by DoD and other members, that sometimes, helps get over some of those hurdles, right? Where they want to have standardization. I think that there is some benefit from like, the GWAT, right? Where there's a lot of cooperation between and bleed over some of those edges between the military and the CIA Spatial Activities Center is a good example, right? A lot of those people are just transiting straight over from there. So if they have something that worked for them there and they get to their new office and they don't have it, they can say, hey, I had this when I was with whatever X, tier 1 organization, and I would like to have that. So I do think there are ways to get in there. I think that, In-Q-Tel fits a need too for like trying to promote some of the products that they see as being needed and making sure that they find a home. But the other problem too is that the scale of the different IC agencies is just dramatically different from like what DoD is dealing with, right? So you don't have a dozen or 100 acquisition officers working on something. You might have a much smaller number. I was talking to somebody in one of the offices at the agency, and she said, yeah, I lost 2 of my 3 acquisition officers when DOGE rifted everybody with 2 years or less experience. So then they were down to 1 acquisition officer for new technology for the director of operations. I mean, that makes it pretty hard, and if they're fielding 150 pitches that come in a week, they're kind of drowning in that. So I think it's incumbent on people who want to sell into that space to probably have a finished product to, be able to address a specific need. I think a lot of it does come down to trust. I don't think they necessarily have the same view that like DoD does of, oh, cool, in quarter two, we'll see if you've gotten somewhere. It has to be much more of like, okay, we can understand how we're going to use this, because they certainly don't have the budget either. And I mean, I think a final thing is that they don't have spare resources. There's not stuff sitting around, right? You know, I guess Director Petraeus, when he came to the agency, as an example, said, I want to do more on China. And they said, all right, cool. Well, what are you going to take away from, right? Because he's used to big army where you got something in reserve. And they're like, yeah, that's not how we operate. So, and I think the last point that somebody made to me recently that I think is interesting is, because often people are on like a 2-year, maybe 3-year timeline before they rotate out. You kind of almost have to catch them at the beginning of their tour in bringing technology on board, or else as they exit and go into probably a completely different role, you might find your product an orphan in some of the IC offices, because people don't remember how you got there to start with. And that's a difficulty with when these offices are lean and don't have a ton of people. Having that, champion that can help make sure that your, product gets to where it's being fielded can be more difficult than, say, in like, a big army office. So I think those are all things that make it difficult. That said, I think there's a lot of understanding of technology. There's some really cool things that are going on out there. They're always looking for solutions, particularly because our adversaries aren't checking with their lawyers first before doing stuff. So, we already are at a disadvantage by operating in a rule-based government that is concerned with, privacy rights, et cetera. And so they really want every unfair advantage that they can get against our competitors. And so I do think there are people that understand the need for technology. It's just getting it to the consumer. And then the last point with that too is, unfortunately, it is not always career enhancing to go into something that's focused on infrastructure or technology, right? Like that's not what your metric typically is for promotion. And so many of the officers that understand how something like this would be useful in, I don't know, your denied area might not be the one that's actually talking to the tech companies. Instead, you have people that have never been overseas and don't own a passport. And
Right.
And that makes it difficult. So if you're trying to convince the guy whose last role was in security why you need something when you're on the ground in Mogadishu, you're probably at a disadvantage. So I don't know if that answers your question, Dave, but these are all things that I'm making excuses for when I fail spectacularly.
Chris, you brought up InQtel as one of those, I don't know what you'd call it, a front door or side door. Some criticism of that organization over its 30 some odd year history. I think you're coming up on 30 years. Just as a side note, my friend, Marine infantryman, dropped out of Harvard to enlist so he could go fight in Afghanistan. Dan Guok is now the chief investment officer at InQtel. Nice. He was a managing director of private accounts at Point 72 before that, doing defense stuff. And it's a bit of a homecoming. He was at InQtel earlier in his career, but really great guy. And I admire him massively. Simon, we are in the final stretch here. One quick note, DoD fully funded through the appropriations process. That is law. No longer do we need to worry about that. Oh, wait, just kidding. The appropriations request season is upon us for FY27.
Begins
and we're going to
anew.
be dealing with that. And then here's maybe the precursor to the final word, which I'll hand off to either you or Dave, depending on who wants the mic. But I did listen to some Turnpike Troubadours, as promised from last week. And gotta say, I like it. I didn't know that I liked Red Dirt Country. I didn't even know really that was a thing, but I'm into it. I like it. Thank you. Thank you for being patient.
It is firmly down the
holding my
middle
hand,
for
Simon.
you. I think Dave will be harder because it doesn't have, the warble of 1910s troubadour music, but it's very good.
Garrett sent me his playlist. I'll give it a shot. You're not wearing a band t-shirt today, are you? That's Reveal Tech swag.
No, I'm wearing my Defense Tech swag.
Laundry day.
I'm wearing some Reveal swag here too. Check this out. We got these new Kuyu hunting shirts that are entirely too tight in the sleeves, and that's not me like sort of bragging.
Wait till I get my hand on the tiller of the Reveal swag. I'm going to make us our own band t-shirts.
Oh, it's so problematic that my biceps are so huge and no t-shirts fit.
I knew that was going to come. I knew it was going to come off that way, and I'm just going to let it sit. Right there.
It's easy to crush the sleeves of a strong medium.
Yeah, it's medium.
When you're
it's medium.
Yeah,
we have larges. I know we do.
This is what I was sent, fellas.
This is what I was sent.
This is what I was sent. So I was given this. Okay, Chris, thanks for joining us. Chris, thanks for joining us this week. We had a good chat. Come back anytime. Good luck in your role, Simon. Wear a band shirt next time. I don't know what your problem is.
Got it.
Dave, thanks for guiding us back on a topic 1, 2, not 3, but 4 times onto the Saronic autonomous shipbuilding of the future. Thank you for doing that. We appreciate you. All right. See you, everybody.